just a month ago that they provided you with a report. We will do the executive director's report again in September. And finally, I want to turn this over to Assistant Superintendent Rex to introduce a number of our new leadership staff who are here in the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have had a journey where we have selected 3 regional directors, and I'd like to introduce you to them at this time. Our North Central Regional Cooperative Interim Director is Mr. Dale DeVries, and we'd like to welcome him.
Stand up, please.
We have for the Desert Valley Regionals Cooperative Dr. Faye Miller. Welcome. And from our Eastern Highlands Cooperative, Miss Michelle Lucci. They have just spent the last 48 hours learning everything they ever wanted to know about being a director for ASDB, and they're still here, and they're excited, so we want to welcome them warmly.
We have one more introduction, and that is the new Executive Director of Business Services. That is Miss Shayna Cooper. Please stand up. You all will have the opportunity to meet her and to talk with her during the work session. I've asked her to come and participate with us. Okay, so with that, I'm going to start my formal report to the board, and I'm going to start with a story. Have you heard of the Chinese bamboo tree story? It's an interesting story. So I'm going to start with that. As you know, the Chinese bamboo tree, like any other plant, needs nurturing. It needs water. It needs fertilizing. It needs sunshine. And there's a story that a farmer decided one day to plant the Chinese bamboo tree seed. So he plants it into an area of land where he can carry the water every day. He adds on the fertilizer, and he makes sure the other plant doesn't block it from getting the sun. And every day he carries the water to that little plot of land. And nothing happens. A year goes by, that plot of land is still empty, nothing's going on, but he's faithful. He keeps going every day. He brings the water, he adds the fertilizer, and he makes sure the other plant doesn't block the sunlight. A second year goes by. Still nothing. It's just barren ground. It looks like nothing is going on. But he continues to have faith and belief, and he continues every day to bring that water and to make sure it has the fertilizer and to make sure it has the sunshine. A third year goes by. Still nothing. Nothing. It's still barren. Nothing's going on. The other farmers around him start to laugh and make fun of him. But by that time, you know, he's in a habit. He's been doing this every day for 3 years. So he decides to continue. He does it for another year. Every day he's bringing that water. He is providing it with fertilizer. He's making sure the other plants don't block the sunlight. A fourth year goes by. And you know, if that farmer was me, I would have given up. That would have been done. But this farmer, you know, he was just in such a habit here. He just kept going every day, bringing the water, fertilizing it, making sure it had the sunshine. 5 years, nothing. Nothing is going on. And then one day, he brings the water, and there's a plant growing there. And every day, he continues to bring that water. That plant grows and grows and grows and grows. And in 6 weeks, this tree grows 80 feet feet up into the air. A miracle, a phenomenal result. So that brings the question, so what was happening during those 5 years? All this time? Did it just, the seed itself just decide to grow, or was there something else going on? Obviously, under the ground, the seed was developing and strengthening and growing roots. And once the roots were entrenched enough and strong enough, then it was time for it to shoot to the sky. Wonderful way of comparing us, people, and organizations, is that we have to build the foundation. We have to have strong roots put in place so that we can support growth. And if we are consistent every day to nurture, to develop the relationships, the trust, to have a common goal, to work together, then, and we stay with it day after day after day, at some point, it will seem miraculous. Overnight, we're going to have tremendous results and outcomes. But it doesn't happen overnight. There's a lot of work that goes into that before the growth occurs, the visible outcomes that we want. So in speaking to that, I just want to remind you the ASDB today, we're still building and rebuilding and strengthening those roots, the foundation. We're trying to get as strong as we can. And once we have that fully developed, then we will see what we want to see with student success and academic outcomes and child development. And as you can see, I'm really very passionate about this. This is really important for us as an agency to be able to take the time and really be thinking about what we want to do and how we do it. As you know, some of the foundation building that we've been doing over the last 3 years is the Advanced Ed accreditation, setting up systems for continuous improvement. We are now in school improvement, and we're setting up curriculum in English, language, arts, and behavior curriculum this fall. We have the expansion of the early childhood family education program. We're more than doubling the number of staff. We just hired 11 new teachers. So we're working very hard in making that expansion happen. We are planning a 3-day training program in August to integrate the current teachers with the new teachers, because it's not enough just to hire new teachers. They have to be highly qualified. So we need to provide them with the support in the professional development for that to happen. The regional cooperatives, you just met 3 of our new leaders. They've just started. We're working very hard in bringing them on board to provide them with the training, the professional development that they need. We're also looking at how we do business internally. Before it was siloed, and now we're setting up in place consistent business practices is the best way of saying this, to try to make it consistent across the agency and to develop better collaborative relationships with school districts. Space utilization, you'll be hearing this afternoon from Albert Duff. He will be giving a presentation, sharing information with you on what we're doing with the Tucson campus and plans for next steps. These are all foundational work. So I can't point to a student academic outcome yet. Given a few more years, I think we will see some significant changes. So for you, as members of the board, in collaborating and working with the agency and working with each other. It's really important that as you take on the responsibility, the strategic planning and the fiduciary responsibility, that you as a board actively work with us collaboratively. And I welcome you. I want an active board. I want your input. I want your thoughtful consideration. I'm looking for more of that from you. The one thing that I will remind you that you are obligated to take the time to make thoughtful, data-driven, well-informed decisions. So with that, one example of a really important decision that we will be making together as a board is, I know that when we go into the work session, one topic may be looking at the possible closing of the residential program on the Tucson campus. So I want to speak to that a little bit. If you, as a board, not today, but at some point in time, decide we need to close the residential program, and you made that decision, we can close the dorms. Absolutely. It's doable. We can, once the decision is made, we can go ahead and send out letters to the parents, to the school districts. We can change the IEPs. We can start the process of transitioning those students back to the home school district. It can be done, and it can be done relatively quickly. And there are benefits to doing that. I estimate just some rough calculations. I don't have exact numbers yet, but we may save right around $1.5 million. With the savings, absolutely, that money can be transferred to expand existing program or to implement a new program. Again, that is really doable. The other benefit of closing the dorms is we have more available space on the Tucson campus. That space could be leased out. So that might be another way of extra revenue for the agency. So those are all really doable activities, steps that we can do. There are also other considerations here. We have 45 students living on the Tucson campus. So with those 45 students, there were decisions made by the parents and by the school districts that as they came together and looked at the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan, somehow they decided there were insufficient resources in the local schools, that they couldn't provide the best education opportunity for that student there at the local schools. So the parents and the school districts made the difficult decision to send them to the Tucson campus. These are students that when we transfer them back to the local school district, they're coming from areas that don't currently have the infrastructure and the resources to support them. Other considerations are in making the decision to transfer them out to the school districts, it means we need to think about expanding the co-ops. Today we have 17 vacancies. We're trying to recruit and hire and fill, most of them in the northern area, right?
Yes.
I asked a few people within the agency to kind of estimate how many staff professionals we would need to hire in the co-ops to support these students. The number I got back surprised even me. It was 33 new staff for 45 students. But when I looked at the breakdown, 23 of the 33 are educational interpreters. These are students who need time to access the classroom instruction. So further breakdown, if you're interested in some of the numbers, is that the voucher revenue would transfer from the school to the co-ops, but that voucher revenue would not cover the full cost of hiring 33 new positions. So we would have to use some other agency funds to partially offset that. Then the schools on the Tucson campus, I'm looking at ASB. We have 45 students there. 21 are dorm students. So transferring them out would reduce to how many day students? I think 24 day students. ASD has 105 students. We transfer out 24 dorm students. That would come down to 81 day students. And of course, we have the residential staff. We would have to do a reduction in force because I don't think we can absorb them elsewhere within the agency. And there are other impacts here. And it's just a preliminary look at the ripple effect in making this kind of decision will have. I'm not saying not to make the decisions. We, board, and the agency need to work together to address these really difficult questions and trying to figure out how to best use our taxpayer dollars to support our students and to align with the common goal of providing the best education and access and supports to children and students that we serve. But the most critical thing for me as a superintendent, if we move too quickly on this without the due deliberation and due diligence, the most important impact this would have is loss of trust. Loss of trust with the parents, with the school districts, with our staff, and with the communities. So, as we ponder these and other difficult questions, as we, the board and the agency, start working together at looking at our resources and developing a strategic plan and the resource allocation, we need to be thinking through these decisions together. And again, I believe that that's your job. That's what you're supposed to be doing. This is what the board hasn't been doing for some time. And it's time now. We're ready to do this. I just want to do it in a way that is accountable, that's collaborative, that's transparent, and that we move forward in the best interest of our students. So going back to the Chinese bamboo tree. What if in the second year and the third year we got impatient and we wanted to know, what's up? What's going on? Why is nothing here? And we dug up the soil. What happens to the roots? It gets damaged. The growth gets stunted. And then it takes longer to recover, to regain its strength, and then to do the growth that we all hope for. And so that's my report to you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to respond.
This is Shelley speaking. I have a question for you, Superintendent Reichman. What are the risks of closing the dorms and transferring these students back to their home districts? You mentioned loss of trust with the staff and parents. I understand that. But are these children going to be able to succeed in their home district with the accommodation of an interpreter as opposed to having direct communication and access to their instruction at ASDB? So my first question is whether or not they'd be successful. The second one, would they possibly perhaps be transferred out of state to another school for the deaf? So I'm asking you, I guess, if you could list some of the risks. Okay, I'll respond to you, Shelley, in sign language. In the IEP, it states that some of the deaf students need direct instruction in American Sign Language. That's the best way for these students to acquire knowledge. So if these students were to transfer back to their home districts, whether or not they have the ability to access their education through an interpreter is unknown at this time, and it's one of the considerations we need to take during this process. For those students who may transfer to New Mexico, for example, and join the dorm program there at the School for the Deaf, that might be a possibility. They also might transfer to California. I don't have an answer to that question, but that is definitely a possibility. This is Shelley again. My follow-up question to that is, you said that you would have to hire 33 new staff. If that were necessary, how soon could that happen? I know it takes time. Do you have any idea how long it would take? Superintendent Reichman. Well, currently, for example, we have a teacher's positions open in Window Rock on the Navajo Nation. And how many years have we had that position open?
3.
Okay, so that position's been vacant for 3 years, and we're still attempting to recruit. Just when we think we've hired somebody, it turns out that that doesn't happen. It's really difficult to recruit a teacher for the deaf in Window Rock. We need one because we have several deaf students there. We've just not been able to recruit there. Shelley, thank you very much.
I'm not sure if that I have a question, but my larger concern is if in their IEP it states that they need that direct instruction in American Sign Language, having an interpreter in the classroom does not, in my mind, equate equivalence or equity, which would be a great concern for me, because I see the kids coming out as adults that have that language delay, and I think we would be causing further language delay by not providing them with that direct access and equity.
So we need to be thinking about those things and how we can provide supports through the co-ops in the event that we transfer them back to the local school districts. Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Next is 2.01, approval of consent agenda consistent with board policy to include items 4.02, 5.06, 6.01, and 6.03.
I move to approve the consent agenda items.
Second.
Can you repeat the list of agenda items?
4.02, 5.01, 6.01, and 6.03.
Can we pull 5.01 for discussion?
Sure.
Okay, so new motion or amendment to the motion? Okay, I will amend my motion to approve the consent agenda items to pull 5.01 for discussion.
And second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Next up is 3.01. There are none, so we can skip that. Next is 4.01, pay increase history, Anita Pai.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, board members, Superintendent Reichman, and Assistant Superintendent Rex. Based on the last board meeting when we discussed the pay increases for our staff, Annette and I had discussed 2 documents that we had that we wanted to show you regarding ASDB history of pay increases by the state. And then the second document was our classification review for compensation for our positions at ASDB. The ASDB history of pay increases goes back to 1995. We were able to gather these records through employee files and go back that far. As you can see, pay actions were given consistently from about 1995 to 2003, and then picked up again in fiscal year 2005 and cut off again at 2008. And you can see as each fiscal year, we've identified the percentages or the general salary adjustments that the state had provided to all state employees. The last state increase for all state employees was the general salary adjustment of 5% in June of 2013. Starting in fiscal year 2015, the agency had reviewed our teacher pay scale and reevaluated our teacher experience for our teachers and placed them on the pay schedule based on their years of experience. So from 2015 to 2018, we have done increases for our teachers. Any questions about our ASDB history of pay increases before I move on to the classification compensation review project? Okay, the second document is our group of classifications. What we did is we took all of our titles in the agency and grouped them in a group. And those groupings, we reviewed the classification. Out of all the groupings, we have, I believe, 7 left to review. We started this process back in 2015. We've also identified the actions that are taken for each of the classification groups. I know that was one of the questions that was brought up at the last board meeting, what we've been doing for other classifications within the agency. And so Annette wanted me to provide that information so that you could see we are diligently working on those classifications. We anticipate that by December of 2018, we will have finished with the other 6 classification groups, and then we'll start over again for review. Any questions regarding the compensation review of classification groups?
This is Shelley. I do. I'm looking at this, and it says the teacher's aide. Were they included in this grouping, or is that going to occur later?
Which document are you referring to?
I'm looking at the classifications here, but our teacher's aide, I know that we're talking about a raise for teachers, but what about the teacher's aides?
The instructional support classification group, which includes the instructional assistants, technical aides, and braillists,
Okay.
their last increase was given in 2016 based on Prop 123. We will be giving a 1.5% increase to those that classification this fiscal year.
Thank you.
This was very helpful. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
Any questions or any other comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is 4.03, approval of superintendent's evaluation.
If you want me to share with you a little bit, I'm happy to do that.
Sure.
I really appreciate you taking the time to do a thoughtful review and evaluation. I can give you just a brief summary of areas that I seem to be doing better, and then other areas that I can continue to improve. In your comments, you stated that I had a passion for the job and getting to know what I need to do with the agency, that I'm taking on challenges, that I'm willing to work with you on the strategic planning and take guidance from you on the vision, that we've gotten the funding for early intervention program, early family education program, that I include different stakeholders' engagement by networking with them, and that I'm making more data-driven decisions. So these are areas I'm doing well, according to you. Areas that I can be improving on is on informing, engaging, and transparency with the board. So obviously I need to continue working with you and building the relationship and the trust. Understanding issues with visual impairment, having more of a sense of urgency for change with action plans. Next one, listening and spoken language, educational opportunities, improvement on student achievement, and you didn't have an understanding of my professional development growth. So these are areas I need to be doing better. The rating from 1 to 5 ranged between 4.2 to 4.6. That was the range.
Great. We appreciate all your great work.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments? Okay, next is 5.01, the burger performance that was taken off of the consent agenda. I assume, Mike, you have some questions?
Yeah, part of our job as superintendent, as you pointed out, is making informed decisions. I just had some questions about backup documentation about the rental agreement for both of these, just seeking clarity on the who's, what's, where's, and how's. I had was a little surprised that we didn't have information in our packet about specifics. I think that it would be important moving forward if we're to make good, sound decisions, if that historical documentation, including the renewal of fiscal matters, is either vetted to the entire board in the packet or made aware of by the finance committee, just so that before we're approving continuing a rental agreement without any documentation, that we know what we're agreeing to do.
Yes, we have Brandon Howell actually here, if you want him to briefly describe what we do with the BPAC and the renting of the auditorium on the Tucson campus. Brandon, can you come down?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, so basically what we do with facilities that we have, certain facilities on campus that we make them available to the community at times when the school is not utilizing them, for a lot of times for one-time rentals. So the rentals you're looking at there, one of them is a dance recital, and then another one is, I believe Coldwell Bankers is having a team building event where they're having a concert in the Burger Center. So They're typically day-to-day rentals. There's also a go ball tournament that Savvy is holding in our gym, and that's what those contracts are referring to.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the auditorium is one of the larger auditoriums in the area. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a 500-seat venue in
So
Tucson.
there aren't many.
There's about 3 or 4 that are its size that are used as much by the community as ours is. Ours is used quite a bit by the community.
You know, I think just adding that would alleviate any hesitation on approving those
Okay.
types of issues. I think that's great that we're doing that. And I know Tucson, I'm sure they're happy to have a venue of that size.
The theater community, the dance, yep, definitely.
So we can add that to the board package in the future if you want that, and or include it with the finance committee when we have meetings. There are different ways we can provide this information.
Gordon, in the past, I mean, don't we usually receive a list of there's contracts that we need to approve and uses, just like you're describing? I know I've seen that list.
Yeah, you should have had the list this time. I usually provide them before the board meeting.
Okay.
Did I miss it? And it's just standard ink blotter for what the times and prices and all that, like, okay. I just didn't know what that was.
All
So
right.
thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
So I'm going to tell you that I don't think the attachments are on the agenda.
We have the attachments, I know that I got the names of.
No.
Oh,
Do you want the attachments?
yeah, the attachments
He
would
wants
be,
the contracts.
and those contracts, I think, even if it's just through the finance group, would be plenty good for me to know what's going on to approve.
Do we have a motion?
Can I make a motion to approve 5.01 as presented?
A second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Approved. Opposed? All right, it passes.
President Sims?
Yes.
Did we need to take action on 4.03?
4.03.
Approving it?
To approve it? All right, that's what the consent calls for. Yes, I would assume. It's kind of, I don't know what would happen if we disapproved it, to be honest with you.
It's
but-
not start as a consent agenda item.
Right, no, I understand. Actually, I'm not sure, the action would be to accept it, right, as presented. Do we have a motion regarding 4.03?
I move that we accept.
So moved.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, thank you for keeping me honest there, Suzanne. 5.02, information and discussion, space utilization presentation.
Yes, so this is an opportunity for Albert Duff to come up and present. We have a PowerPoint too, right? That
Yes,
we're gonna
that
be
is correct.
putting up.
Good afternoon, Board President Sims, members of the board, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex. Thank you for having me. I'd like to start out with our presentation regarding space utilization. Am I able to move this computer onto the? I can't do two things at once. So I'd like to start with the first slide, Space Utilization Committee goals. So roughly about 9 months ago, ASDB, along with Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, came to the conclusion that we need to start a space utilization actual committee looking at the campus as a whole for the amount of space that we're on. We devised that committee with key members on the campus, including the principal, other key managers and supervisors on the campus in order to give quality input to make sure that we were operating off of the best interest as we made decisions. These were the 5 key points through our space utilization committee that we started out with. So first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we considered the needs of the student population to meet their educational, behavioral, and emotional needs. Also, while making sure that we were reducing and evaluating our current space utilized. We also wanted to make sure that unoccupied space, that we were able to actually look at space in order to lease it out to offset the financial needs of the Tucson campus. We utilize the initial data to discuss possible plans to meet the actual space compliance through the School Facilities Board and the Governor's Office. In one of our previous board meetings, we actually did discuss some of the actual minimums. And obviously, whenever we were discussing that, what became clear was that those are bare minimums and not the ideal. And I think that that's something that's important to consider as we go through this PowerPoint. Also, with the governor's plan through the Goal Council 5, we were kind of left out on ASDB as a whole because we are an educational facility, but the state as a whole has been going through this process as well. And Governor Ducey has put forth plans and committees in order to actually reduce state utilized space across the entire state of Arizona, which led to ASDB being part of discussions and meetings with the governor's office and through that goal council of actually better utilizing our space as well. And we have been in continuous contact with Department of Child Safety as well as other state agencies in order to look at actually leasing out our buildings to them as well. And we'll get into that a little bit further. Also, we were wanting to make sure that we utilized the information to better make and better plan for our capital improvement plan and also our 5-year plan.
I have a question.
Yes.
Why not a 10-year plan or a 2-year plan or an 18-month plan or a 7-year plan? Why a 5-year plan?
We wanted to start with medium to long range goals, but not something that we could not accomplish or actually go in a long term that we could not foresee future items. As we were able to look at our population actual decrease, which is decreasing roughly 5% per year on the Tucson campus over the past 10 years, we know a 10-year route. So roughly 5 years gave us a good shooting point rather than going too far out with us not knowing the actual data from 20, 30 years out. And that's what we had at the time. So that was what the determination was.
But it's a 5-year plan to implement or a 5-year plan looking ahead?
So that particular item is a 5-year plan for actual CIP, which is capital improvement. So not a 5-year plan for how we're going to lease, but a 5-year plan on how we're going to maintain our buildings. So this was the original goal of the committee,
Right.
not what was meant to be presented to the board at first.
Right. Okay.
That clear?
Yep.
Okay. So the items that we wanted to actually bring forward to the board for more of your consideration based on the information was the present information, which is the types of buildings that we have on campus, and also the space requirements we have. Short-term goals are benchmarks that the committee originally set up for actually reducing space in order to be closed, leased out, or demolished. And then also the leasing opportunities we have, our current progress within them, and then also some long-term goals and considerations that we're also looking at now for your consideration. So this goes much more into what you were more interested in during the last board meeting. So when we consider building types, the Tucson campus is not just a school. The Tucson campus is a multi-purpose facility, just as we said with Mr. Howell. We have space that's rented out to the community already at this time. We have educational space, dormitory space, as well as a broad of other space that we use on the campus. As you can see, the educational space is roughly 146,000 square feet. Dormitory is 73,000. Office is about 126,000 for a total of just short of 350,000 square feet total. Now, this is prior to any consolidation, so this is just the bare numbers. Now, regarding Arizona Revised Statute 15-2011, and as well as the School Facilities Board, as well as the governor's mandate, when we're looking at office space, we have a new mandate that any new office space that we create or look at have a 200 square foot maximum, and that's for any new space. The current occupied space, that is what it is, but as we were going through and looking at buildings, we definitely want to make sure that even our current space tried to meet those same goals. And if you've ever been in a 200 square foot office, you realize that that's more than enough space for most office people. We do have some exceptions to that whenever we were looking at office space, when we had people that had specialized tasks, say an audiologist or someone within the visually impaired community and with their spatial needs, they might need different items based on their needs. When we're looking at the actual square footage for the school facilities, we had, this is from the School Facilities Board, so this is their bare minimums, and as Mr. Manley pointed out previously, It's not enough to actually do quality education, but it is our bare minimums that we have to require to. So with that information, with the number of students we had, it became quite clear to the spatialization committee that we needed to reduce space, but the question was how much. And then this was what the spatialization committee, as well as Superintendent Reichman and Assistant Superintendent Rex, we were able to come up with as just a good starting point for us to look at, and an initial goal. There's no point in making a plan if you don't have a goal. So when we were looking at that, the dormitory space, we wanted to reduce 30,000 square feet of that 70, 25,000 of education, 40,000 of office, reducing roughly 95,000 square feet or 27% of our campus. That was the initial goal. On the last board meeting, you did actually receive a very similar item to this, which is what we've currently closed already, and actually within the process to be able to lease out. So this is not just this is a snippet of the whole that we've already actually closed as we've been going through this process. But currently we have roughly 30,500 square feet that is viable space that with some tenant improvement could be utilized for leasing. And this we're looking at having available by October 1st. Now granted, that is just what we would have available. The plan to actually implement and the additional considerations that we need to move forward to actually leasing are still in the very baby stages as we get onto this process. The reason being is that we still want to make sure that we work with the Attorney General's office, that we're following all the laws, because this is something that not only other state agencies are very new to, this is all something that has never been done in a school, to my knowledge, of actually leasing out buildings on the campus that we actually reside. Second phase is, and actually kind of a long-term shot that we're looking for, looking at the education side, we're actually planning on closing the high school over the course of this summer. Some additional items that we need to do is such as build a science lab in the middle school. We're in the process of actually quoting and designing that as we speak, and also continued effort within the spatialization committee to meet further goals, and additional goals that would probably be set forth obviously by the board. As we move through the education.
I'm
oh,
sorry.
go
So
ahead.
if you rented it to another state agency, then that wouldn't seemingly have as many obstacles as renting it to an outside entity, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
So you have this huge tenant called U of A just east of us. It would seem that that would be a very natural progression to be a tenant and
Absolutely.
get over some of these obstacles as compared to a private tenant, correct?
Absolutely. And if they are a state agency through the governor's office, it would be a direct transfer from APHIS. So the ability to transfer funds from one agency to the next, there's a lot of road barriers there that would be cut out immediately. So our ideal goal would be to market first and foremost to the state, because not only does it provide ASDB with additional revenue, it helps offset the state because we could offer a reduced price for those agencies and they get a better deal as well. So the state overall wins by renting from itself.
So, okay.
Can I just also chime in and say,
Yeah.
you know, based on the population of students that are served on that campus, looking at entities, other state entities like Division of Developmental Disabilities, State VR, Vocational Rehabilitation, we're serving those students anyway. It would really be kind of nice to have a office on campus in my mind.
Absolutely. There's also organizations that are also serve ASDB or have very close relations to the visually impaired deaf community that would be very beneficial to have on our campus to lease out those buildings to as well. So those will be our primary choices, and obviously the least obstacles or barriers of entry into that process. But the change of culture that we have to start to even have them consider coming onto our campus is even a barrier there, because, for example, when the state started looking at spatialization, we were wiped off the board as even state buildings to be considered. So now we're just breaking into the state entity saying, look, we're here, we're available, we want you here. We would rather have you here than an outside entity. We have lots of space that we would like you to consider. So you're absolutely right that that would be our primary choice.
And I'm just thinking from a service standpoint, as well as most of those agency employees have to be fingerprint clearanced anyway. And it might bring down one of those barriers.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we're all right on the same page. Any other questions before we proceed? Okay. So the next I was able to turn over to the board for consideration, also for you to have on your information, are the educational dormitory and other support building breakdowns. As you can see from this spreadsheet, you can see the age multiplier. It's actually off by a couple of years because this data we get from ADOA, Building Construction Services. You can see the construction year, the FY18 building renewal and FY19. So building renewal are monies that we receive from ADOA that are appropriated to us to extend the life of the building. Now, these are not monies we received. This is the calculation based on the age of the building, the size of the building, that ADOA building renewal would need to give to us to do capital improvement plans or tenant improvement plans on the building. We do not get nearly that amount. No one in the state gets nearly close to that amount. So the original purpose behind the Space Utilization Committee was by leasing buildings out, we could offset the cost of the capital improvement on our buildings due to the fact of how much deferred maintenance has been done throughout 20, 30, 40 years, as you can see within the campus of each of the building. You have the gross square footage, as well as you can see the added total, the scheduled for removal, for example, on this one, which is the bathhouse, which is a very underutilized and very neglected building from 42 years of being pushed off to the edge of building renewal needs. We have our total to be closed or leased, and I've also included the total operational classroom and total support. I'd like to also make note and draw your attention to total classroom. As we close down, we would only have 62,000 square feet of actual education space. That would essentially be the high school, middle school, the high school would be closed, middle school, elementary school, as well as I believe Clifford building was included into that. As Clifford, we were able to consolidate the birth to 3 program, early childhood, as well as preschool into that one building. So that has become completely educational as a birth to 5 program through this process of space utilization and moving people around on the campus. Whenever we take a look at the total number of being closed, which is the high school being closed, we're looking at a 14% closure in education space. Dormitory space, I'd like to make note at the bottom there is Apache and Saguaro and Yucca dormitories. Both of those have been repurposed into operational, as in office space. Apache is now space that is utilized for agency resources, which includes the finance department as well as the IT department now. In addition, this means that we are only currently actively using Maricopa, Pima, Manzanita, and Ocotillo. Navajo is being repurposed also as a dormitory support building in order to utilize space for the dormitory activities outside of the dorm. We're also using that as a possible option for additional office spaces needed for agency needs. When we look at the total dormitory space is 73,000, the option to close or lease, which would be the Pima dormitory of 14,000, as well as another 20,000 or roughly 20,000 to be repurposed. We're looking at a 45% reduction in dormitory space this year. That's where we're at so far.
I'd like to comment. This
Yes.
is Shelley.
Yes, Shelley.
So I'm a little bit confused about the terminology that you're using. When you say closed, does that mean you're renting it out? It's closed for good? It's no longer in use? Do you mind explaining that?
Absolutely. So a closure in our minds is the building is not to be occupied. It will receive minimal maintenance needs in order to maintain the building structure, but it will not receive the same level of care as an occupied building with tenants in it. A leased building is a building that would be identified to be leased out to a third-party individual, no longer to be utilized by ASDB for our needs, but would be utilized to actually generate income in order to offset our financial needs.
This is
Albert?
Shelley. Okay. Okay. So when you're closing a building, you're not using the building. There's no plans to reopen the building, and it will not be in use. Correct?
That is correct. And the reason some of those buildings have been identified for closure is either due to the fact of the amount of tenant improvement that would need to be invested into that building due to ADA requirements. A prime example of that would be the vocational building on our campus. It's a two-story building that's swamp cooled, that doesn't have an elevator, that was built in the 1950s, that has the abatement needs on asbestos needs just to bring that up would be $1 million plus. So the amount of capital we would need to invest into that in order to bring that up to a leasing point, it's just not a very feasible option. As time goes on, if we had additional funds to do that, absolutely, that building could be scheduled for that for future plans. But within a 5-year period, I would recommend that we keep it closed in order to reduce not only building safety, but also possibility of also saving money on utility costs, energy, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
Albert?
Yes.
Mike Gordon. Looking at the educational breakdown, the dormitories, in the far right column, there's
Mhm.
a number, say for Clifford Preschool, there's 146,000. What does that column mean?
146,000. In the top right of the education space?
Yeah.
146,000. So if
That-
you
that
add up,
whole column,
yeah, if you add up so the total education space, if you were to add up all the gross square footage of each of the buildings on that sheet, that's the total square footage for that. So the scheduled to be removed, that's 146,000 or 1,406 square feet. That one I pulled from the bathhouse. As you can see, that's 1,406 square feet. That one was pulled from there. The high school option to close lease, and what I mean by option to close or lease is that is the option of the board to make that decision of whether or not we were to lease that out. It is in the best interest for us to at least close it to save on utility costs, as we are able to better utilize space in the middle school and elementary school to have all of our students in those two buildings.
Okay.
So the plan right now is to move middle school into elementary school, so that way you will have elementary, middle school, and then high school will move into middle school. We'll have to obviously rename the buildings and then better utilize those there. And so right now the capital in order to do that is some quotes that we're now just preliminary working on for a science lab inside the middle school. As you go down that line, total operational, I broke those out, and maybe it would be best for us as we work through this process. I can share more details exactly which building goes into which category and why I placed it there. Also, on the very bottom of that, I forgot to point out that roughly after we close the high school, each student will have 430 square feet. And so considering a minimum of 100 to 150, we're well above our minimum standpoint, but it would be, in my opinion, a reasonable number of square footage. If we wanted to reduce it further, it would be additional tenant improvements, additional capital to be invested in order to put up walls and doors, fire sprinkler, fire alarm, et cetera, would be needed in order to make smaller classrooms within the building in order to reduce that and possibly put people into more and more of the building. But with the resources we had on hand, we utilized the schools as they were, and then we're able to reorganize classrooms and use each classroom within a building, kind of packing the can, so to speak, of what it is without having to draw more lines.
Thank you.
This last sheet is a bit hard to see, and I think it'd be best to kind of go over it quickly over on the right-hand side. We have scheduled for office support, this is everything else on the campus. And as you can see, there are everything from a spray booth to that vocational building I was talking about, the museum, which is actually the old superintendent's house, classroom, Kachina building. There are multiple buildings on here that are kind of the leftovers that are not education or dormitory. That comprises 126,000 square feet. Option scheduled for removal, 13,000 square feet. That is one of our buildings that would be the live-in portable, which Superintendent Reichman has spent a few nights in and knows firsthand walking through that building that it is not of the best condition. It is an old portable building and needs to be removed. And then we have to option to close or lease additional buildings within that, which were in the previous slide regarding where our current progress is, giving us total office space, total support space, total other, which are, for example, is the Brooker Performing Arts Center is definitely an other. When we look at closure or lease, we're looking at a 13% reduction within those buildings as well.
Is there expertise within the state or somewhere? So you describe a two-story building with a swamp cooler and asbestos. It sounds like to me a bulldozer is probably the only thing it really needs. So is there somebody who gives that advice
Absolutely.
to you to,
Mhm.
because, I mean, it sounds like to me it's a demo, but I'm not. an
Their
expert.
advice is that it is built like a, no other building is built like a 1950s building anymore. It is best to paint the building, leave it as is until there would be funds, because the amount of money to demo it, the state would rather invest money on improving buildings that people are going to use than spend money on a building that's not going to hurt anybody.
So they just want to contain the asbestos and let it rot.
Essentially, lock up the building, paint it, walk away. And ASDB, we don't have the funds in order to spend $1 million just to remove a building that isn't harming anyone.
Is that how much it costs to demo that?
That was some rough estimates. We
Wow.
didn't get in, those were budgetary numbers. They didn't give exact quotes due to the amount of money that we just walking through the building. So, and when we're on the Tucson campus, I will be more than happy to walk you through each one of these buildings to show you.
No, but that's essentially a liability on our books.
Due to the construction of the building, people inside of the building, it would be a liability. On the outside of the building, there was no fear of the building falling down or having any structural issues.
Yet.
So, yet. And so that becomes that classic weight with the state of, oh, look, it's finally falling down. It is finally that risk hazard. Now they'll finally pay the money into it, that we all experience all too well within the agency. But at this time, when we petition for funds to remove that, they're denied at this point. Not the answer we're all hoping for, though.
Excuse me, Albert.
Yes, sir.
Mike Gordon. How large is that property?
It's 54 acres,
Okay.
346,000 square feet, and I believe it was 30 structures total. That includes the swimming pool. So it is substantial in size.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Okay. Would you like to go through the remainder of it?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was a.
There's more. There's more. Do we have time?
Yeah, no, go ahead. No,
Okay.
my bad.
My apologies on this one. So I'd like to point out where our current progress is to our benchmarks from what we originally were going for. Dormitory reduced 33,000 square feet, surpassing their benchmark by 3,000 square feet. The high school closure gave us 21,000. We're short on education space being closed to meet our benchmark by short of 4,000. Office support, et cetera, closed or will have available for lease, identified for lease, another 30,000. This gives us just short 10,000 of our goal, which means that we are about probably 24%, 23% closed or available for lease on this campus by October 1st. So this gives us our leasing opportunities. So currently available, Kachina, driver's quarters, formerly transportation, the maintenance building, Pima dormitory, and then available July 1st, the high school, giving us total available for lease with minimal tenant improvement of 50,000 square feet. This map here shows where those buildings are located. As we went through that process, we made sure that we identified core buildings that could not be closed, such as a cafeteria or a school, and made sure that those were ones that we were to move people into, and the buildings on the outskirts of the campus were more viable for leasing opportunities. The ones circled, so buildings 11, which is Kachina, 21, which is Pima, 13, which is the maintenance garage, 24, which is the driver's quarters or transportation, and number 9, which is the high school. All these are on the essentially the perimeter of the campus, giving us a good option in order to lease those out to control security. Also to, we had taken into consideration the concerns presented forward already. This leads us to something that has already been voted on just shortly, which is the Arizona Revised Statute 15-1323, which is already we are renting out and in many ways leasing the BPAC at this time and other short-term leases or rentals on the campus. And those monies are obviously kept in an enterprise fund, which may be used only for the costs associated with operating the facilities for the purpose of which the monies were received. So the way that the current law reads, according to my understanding, is to make sure that the money that we receive from this stays within the campus, that we are not using it for other purposes, that it's meant for that same student first ethos to make sure our classrooms are up to date. Once again, Because this is very uncharted territory, this would still need to be reviewed by the Attorney General's office. We still have a lot of other work in order to see how those funds would work as we go through this process. So lastly, and as we wrap up here, thank you for the time. Items to consider, as we already said, who will we lease to? We already kind of touched on to that. We would obviously have our preferred leasees, other state agencies. What restrictions would we apply to make sure that we consider those items? Access control, fingerprints, other clearances that we would like to consider. How much would we charge per square foot? Within your board documents, I included within roughly a 1 mile radius on that Excel sheet, the current going rate for each lease. And currently within 1 mile, there's roughly 19 leases available around our campus, which are flex buildings, office spaces. I did not include commercial, and they range anywhere from roughly $6 a square foot all the way up to $25 a square foot, giving us an average of $16.90. And looking at 50,000 square feet, you're looking at anywhere from, around $400,000 a year up to $800,000 a year leasing potential. With that being said, the belief that we would lease out all 50,000 square feet for $16 a square foot is not logical or reasonable. But are there some strong opportunities, as long as it's done correctly, as we make these considerations, as we make these decisions and move forward with this? There are options and availabilities for us to be able to offset the cost of this campus. Either way, even if we do not lease out these buildings, those buildings will be closed. We will see some return on our investment of time based on just utilities alone. We're also seeing some improvements just in the overall operation by, for example, Clifford now being birthed to 5 buildings. So now we have early childhood and preschool in that building. Or, for example, having business services and IT located in the same building, or operations all within one building. This creates a much better and more efficient environment for us to operate in. The other thing that we must make apparent and also consider as we go through this process is that we stay true to the history and meaning of ASDB to provide the best education to deaf, blind, HIVI, and deaf-blind students, that we always maintain our student-first ethos as we go through this process. So are there good opportunities for us here? Absolutely. But it cannot be at the cost of student safety, security, or their well-being of education. And I thank you for your time, and if you have any other questions, I'm free to answer those.
And I know that this needs to go to, this is, okay, I know this needs to go to the AG, but as far as reinvesting those monies into the agency, would it be the agency as a whole or only the Tucson campus?
At this time, I think that would be for the HE to determine. Right now, the way that the monies are used, for example, in the Burger Performing Arts Center, that fund, that's an enterprise fund that is managed through the finance department, and it's used only for the Burger Performing Arts. Granted, we would have to get a decision from the AG on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is 7.01, call to the public for any comments. Okay. 7.02, agenda items for the next board meeting. Any board members or anybody have any agenda items that they would like discussed? I'd make a comment. I'll be meeting with Superintendent Reichman, and we would expect to discuss her contract at the next meeting.
Yes,
Okay?
thank you.
You're welcome. You need the evaluation before you can do that, so. Okay. No specific agenda. Okay. Action item 8.01, adjournment.
I make a motion, we adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
And I second it.
Aye.
Everybody wants to be
Aye.
a second
Aye.
on that one.
Opposed? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. We'll see you in September, everybody.
Not yet. Go
No, I
to
know.
the work
There's
session.
more than the board. Whoever else is not. We are going to take a 15-minute break, and we'll reconvene. Well, you can eat or do whatever, and we'll start the meeting at 5:30.